So you've heard about Fuji's film simulations, and you've seen all the photos that people have been taking, emulating everyone's favorite film stocks. Kodachrome, Portra, Ektar, Gold, and everything else in between. And you've even been able to lowball somebody enough on Facebook Marketplace to actually get your hands on a Fuji in a reasonable price. Didn't have to pay hundreds of dollars over MSRP for one. So naturally, you go online and you find the first Portra sim or the most popular film recipe that you can find. You load it into your brand new Fuji and you start shooting with it. But all of a sudden, you look down at your photos and they're not quite your style. They look good, sure, they have cool colors and all, but they're not really you. So what do? You could spend the time and go through every single one of the million film recipes out there and figure out which one is closest to your style and suits you best. Or you can watch this video, where I'm going to take you through every single setting that Fuji cameras use to create those ever popular film simulations. And more importantly, I'm going to take you through what they do and how they affect your image, so that you can use that knowledge to fine-tune film recipes to your own specific style. So with that being said, let's begin. Before we get started, let's talk about the difference between film simulation and film recipe. While these two terms can be used pretty interchangeably, the term film simulation is what Fuji actually calls the 20 or so pre-programmed film simulations on their camera. They're essentially color profiles that will apply to the JPEGs that you shoot. Film recipe, on the other hand, is a customized set of settings that usually is used to emulate the look of well-known film stock, but can also be used to create your own unique looks. In addition to that, I do have to mention that all of these settings only affect JPEG. So when you see people talk about shooting with film simulations, they are not shooting in RAW. They are shooting in JPEG, because that's the only way that the in-camera adjustments and settings actually get saved. While some of these settings will have an effect in your RAW files, at the end of the day, RAW files are RAW files. And they're easy to manipulate and edit in post, but they don't record all of the information that is applied in camera. So all of the things that I'm going to talk about today do require you to shoot in JPEG. So to start, let's talk about film simulations. These are the pre-programmed color profiles that come with your Fuji camera. These come direct from Fuji, and in the most recent models, there's about 20 of them. On the older models, you will have a few less to choose from. But first, let's start with Provia Standard. This is the standard color profile, the base color of Fuji cameras, if you will. To be honest, nothing too special here, but if you want a pretty clean starting point, Provia Standard is a great way to go. Next up, we have Velvia Vivid, which is a vivid color profile as its name suggests. Colors do get punched up quite a bit, and contrast is a little bit more noticeable. It's a great starting point if you want a really colorful and vibrant picture. Next up, we have Astia Soft, which is a desaturated, muted profile, kind of on the opposite spectrum of Velvia Vivid. If you want a more faded look, maybe a more vintage look, you can certainly start here with this profile. Next up, we have Classic Chrome, which is intended to emulate well-known chrome film stocks like Kodachrome or Ektachrome. In this color profile, blues are going to be a lot more apparent. Reds, greens, and other colors will be quite a bit desaturated. This is not quite the same as simply applying a cool white balance across your entire image. This specific profile will actually desaturate the color information recorded in colors that are not blue, and it will impart noticeable blue shifts in certain colors as well. Next up, we have Rela Ace, which is one of the more popular film simulations to start with. It features very natural colors with a slight desaturation and a little bit of a muted look. Not quite as extreme as something like a Classic Chrome or an Astia Soft, but has a little bit of a reduction in vibrance. Next up, we have Pro Negative High, which is intended to be pleasing on skin tones, but has a bit of a bumped up saturation and contrast in the other tones. Next up, we have Pro Negative Standard, which is similar to Pro Negative High, pleasing on skin tones, but has noticeably less contrast and saturation in other colors. Next up, we have Classic Negative, which is intended to create a very vintage look. You'll notice muted colors and a slight lift in maybe blacks and shadowy areas, as well as a noticeable, slightly warm, creamy shift in any of your white tones. This is a great starting point if you're looking to emulate an older film look, maybe a slightly expired kind of film. Next up, we have Nostalgic Negative, which is intended to create a very nostalgic look, emulating really expired film. You'll notice a lot of desaturated colors and a heavy muted tone. This is a great starting point if you are looking to emulate a really expired film, or you just want that really heavily muted, moody look. Next up, we have Eterna Cinema, which is named after Fuji's well-known cinema film stock. It features a relatively flat profile that's not quite as flat as a log profile, for example, but offers that same increase in dynamic range. Next up, we have Eterna Bleach Bypass, which is a classic bleach bypass look, featuring heavily desaturated colors, lifted shadows, but deep blacks. In my opinion, this is a relatively extreme profile to begin with, so unless you are specifically looking for a bleach bypass look, this is generally not going to be a good starting point if you want something that looks relatively natural. Next up, we have Acros, which is Fuji's well-known black and white film stock. It features in its standard profile quite a bit of contrast and is a very, very good starting point for all of your black and white simulations. Now, when it comes to the black and white profiles, this is where Fuji gets a little bit loose in their definition of 20 film simulations, because by the time we get done, you'll notice there's only really about 14 different profiles that I'm going to be talking about today. But in each of the two black and white profiles, you have the option to apply a yellow, green, or red filter digitally to that black and white profile. Each of these filters have the effect of enhancing the brightness or whiteness of those respective colors. So technically with Acros, you have 4 profiles: Acros base with a red filter, green filter, or yellow filter. And the same applies with the standard monochrome profile. It's very similar to Acros with just a little bit less contrast to start with. The same 3 filters apply as well. And finally, we have Sepia, which is just like any other sepia filter you've ever seen, where the image is basically entirely brown. Generally not a great starting point unless this is a specific effect or look you are trying to start with. So now that we've talked about all of the film simulations and starting points, let's talk about the grain effect. Grain is simply a physical texture that is apparent across your image. It is usually associated with a more vintage look and older film stocks. It is also generally associated with higher ISO values in both physical film and digital photography. In your Fuji camera, the grain setting is broken down into 2 categories. One is the strength of the grain effect, and 2 is the size of the grain. So in the strength, you can set it to none, weak, or strong. In the size category, you can set it to small or large. Using the grain effect is relatively simple, and it's pretty much the same grain effect as you would apply in editing programs like Lightroom. But there are a couple of key things to keep in mind when setting up your grain effect. One is the ISO, or the speed of the film that you are looking to emulate. Larger grain is generally associated with higher ISO film. It's also usually associated with expired film. So if you are looking to emulate a higher speed film like a Cinestill 800T, for example, which is well known for its large apparent grain, you can certainly set the grain setting to strong and the size to large. However, if you're looking to emulate the look of a cleaner, sharper film, like an Ektar 100 for example, which Kodak boasts has the world's finest grain, you're going to be better off setting the grain effect to weak and small. But do keep in mind the film that you are looking to emulate, or just the final look that you want to create. Next up, let's talk about the color chrome effect. This is an effect that is used in pretty much every single film simulation recipe, and it's one that is probably the most unique to the Fuji ecosystem in my opinion. You can certainly add grain in other cameras, and grain is something that's very easy to add in post as well, but the color chrome effect is somewhat difficult to replicate in your editing program. The color chrome effect essentially decreases the luminance of all colors except blues. So color chrome effect only affects colors not blue. By decreasing the luminance of those colors, you decrease the appearance of brightness in those colors, but without necessarily reducing saturation or reducing exposure in those colors. But what decreasing the luminance does do is increase the appearance of various gradations of the same color. Meaning that if you shoot something that is heavily red, like a rose, for example, by decreasing the luminance of red, you'll see more subtle changes in different shades of red. This also has the effect of tricking your eyes to thinking that there's more color without increasing saturation. Oftentimes, increasing saturation makes those different gradations of the same color simply disappear, and it floods the image with one shade of that same color. While the color chrome effect does decrease the brightness of those colors in a technical sense, to your eyes, it increases the appearance and almost vibrance of those colors, and it increases the subtle differences in the same shade of a color. And it can have the effect of increasing the vibrance or saturated look of your image without overwhelming it with one singular shade of each color. Next, let's talk about the color chrome effect blue. This is the same exact effect as the regular color chrome effect, except the blue effect only affects the blue tones of your image. This effect is most apparent when you are shooting a bright blue sky. Shooting a bright sky without the color chrome effect blue turned on, you'll notice that the sky, especially if it's a bright sunny day, maybe midday for example, tends to appear more white than blue. You can certainly turn down your exposure and maybe increase the saturation of the image, but that winds up making the entire sky look like one shade of blue. The color chrome effect blue will make the subtle differences in those different shades of blue as they change in grade from the brightest part of your image to the darkest part of your image. And it'll increase the visual appearance of those subtle different shades and gradations. Now that we've talked about the two color chrome effects, let's talk about how to use them in conjunction with each other. The key with using these two effects is about finding balance. If you simply turn both of these effects to strong at all times, and you're shooting scenes without a lot of blues, for example, it can make certain colors appear slightly differently. And it's going to make that appearance of brightness in your image a little bit less apparent. This can have the effect of muting your image a little bit. If you know you're going to be shooting the ocean side, for example, the color chrome effect blue may be a bit more useful to you than the regular color chrome effect. But if you're going to a tropical section of a botanic garden where there's almost no blues but lots of reds and greens, the regular color chrome effect will have more of an apparent effect on your images in that setting. Next up, let's talk about the smooth skin effect real quick. This is essentially a beauty filter. It applies a bit of a blur to skin tones in your image. Ideally, it should only affect the faces and skin of a human subject. But since skin tones are quite varied, the smooth skin effect can unintentionally smooth out other colors in your scene if they happen to be similar to human skin tones. This particular setting can be set to either off, weak, or strong. And in my opinion, the most you should ever use in camera is the weak setting. In the strong setting, it can have that weird, uncanny valley effect on your human subjects. When it comes to skin smoothing, if you are shooting portraits a lot, it is better to apply skin smoothing in post-processing, where you can pick and choose certain areas and spots to smooth out instead of just applying a blanket smooth to an entire subject. So my recommendation is to either keep the setting off at all times, which is what I do, or if you must use it at weak setting at most. Next up, we have the white balance, which if you've used the camera in any kind of a manual mode is pretty straightforward already. White balance basically sets the reference point for white colors in your image. In every single camera, there's going to be a variety of automatic white balance settings. You can set it to just be automatic, you can set it to balance for tungsten light, you can balance it for daylight, for shadow, and everything in between. But you can also balance for specific Kelvin values. One white balance adjustment that's available in a lot of cameras nowadays, but is also used quite a bit in Fuji film recipes, is the white balance shift. In Fuji cameras specifically, you can shift the balance between reds and whites in your white balance, causing the white balance to shift a little bit more green or a little bit more magenta or a little bit more cyan or somewhere in between. And you can fine tune your white balance and the color that it applies to your image. Next, let's talk about the dynamic range setting, which is also something that is very unique to Fuji cameras. The dynamic range setting can either be set to DR 100, 200, or 400. This setting should not be confused with HDR, or high dynamic range, which usually requires the stacking of multiple different pictures at multiple different exposures. The dynamic range, or DR setting in Fuji cameras, tries to increase dynamic range in a singular image by underexposing by either 1 or 2 stops, and then lifting the shadows and other colors in the darker areas to compensate. This has the effect of creating higher dynamic range because it allows you to capture details often lost in the highlights if you were solely to expose for the shadows. But it also brings your shadows back up to a more neutral exposure. DR100 is the base dynamic range, which means the camera is not underexposing at all. DR200 will underexpose by 1 stop, but DR200 requires you to shoot at 2x the base ISO. So for example, if your base ISO is 160 like on the XM5, you have to shoot in ISO 320 in order to access DR200. In DR400, the camera will underexpose by 2 stops, but it requires you to shoot at 4x the base ISO. Now, while more dynamic range may sound appealing, do keep in mind that it requires you to shoot at higher ISO values. Next, let's talk about D-range priority, which stands for dynamic range priority. D-range priority will basically tell the camera to prioritize dynamic range above all else. This cannot be used at the same time as the DR 100, 200, or 400 settings. It will deactivate those settings if you have D-range priority turned on. Because the camera is going to prioritize dynamic range above all else, the image is going to come out flatter and it's going to look a little bit muted. If that's the effect you're looking for, you can certainly do that. DR 200 and 400 will make your images look a little bit punchier. But because DR priority flattens your image, you also will not be able to use things like the tone curve. So if you are looking for a contrasty image or a punchy image, D-range priority is not the one to use. Speaking of the tone curve, let's talk about the internal tone curve setting on the Fuji cameras. Just like your tone curve in your editing program like Lightroom, it allows you to adjust the balance between shadows and highlights. While editing programs give you a lot more flexibility to edit the balance of things like mid-tones as well, on Fuji cameras you can only edit the balance of highlights and lowlights. The tone curve allows you to set a highlight value between +4 and -2, and the same with the shadows value. Now keep in mind the tone curve is again all about finding balance. If you are wanting a more punchy image, you can certainly create a bit of an S-curve. If you want a slightly flatter or muted image, you can create a slightly inverted tone curve. The tone curve is going to be applied to your JPEG. So if you're shooting in JPEG and you do something weird or extreme with your tone curve, the image is going to have that weird or extreme tone curve, and it's going to be very difficult to edit it out afterwards. When using the tone curve, it is recommended that you keep your adjustments relatively subtle, because in post, if you want to punch up the contrast a little bit, you can certainly add more of a tone curve, but it's going to be much harder to take it out if you applied too much in camera. Next up, we have the color setting, which increases the color density in your image, essentially increases the vibrance. This setting can be very useful to make your images pop, but just like any other setting, when used too much, it can have a bit of an extreme effect. The color setting can be set to either +4 or -4. +4 can be a bit of an extreme vibrant look, and -4 can be a bit of an extremely desaturated look. So use this with caution. Just like a lot of the other settings we've talked about today, it is very easy to apply more of this in post, but very difficult to take it out. Next, let's talk about the clarity and sharpness settings. Both of these settings intend to improve the appearance of details in your image. First, let's talk about sharpness. Sharpness will increase the exposure of pixels in high contrast areas in your image. These tend to be the edges of objects in your image, like the edges of someone's hair or the edges of someone's hand, for example. While sharpness can make images look a little bit crisper, it is not a replacement for being in focus. That is always going to be the ultimate way to make your images look sharp. Using too much sharpness can make your images look a bit uncanny and almost as if they have this weird highlight around all of the different edges. The same if you go the opposite direction. If you decrease sharpness by too much, it can make your image look a bit soft and fuzzy, almost like if it's corrupted in some way. Clarity is the same effect, but it increases the exposure of pixels in the more mid-tone regions. Clarity is intended to help bring out more subtle details like textures, for example. Again, this effect can be applied in either +5 or -5, but in both extremes, it can have a bit of an extreme look, so use clarity with caution. Now, specifically on the clarity setting, one of the things that it requires your camera to do is think after every single image. If you turn your clarity setting on anything except 0, you will notice that after every image, your camera will have to process the image for about a second or so. While this may not seem like a big deal, it can cause you to miss some shots if you are shooting something rapid fire. My personal recommendation is to keep the clarity setting off so that you avoid having to wait for your camera to process the image after each shot, so that you can take rapid fire images if you want to. If you ever need to apply clarity in post, it is very easy to do so. Sharpness, though, does not require processing after every image, so you can use it, but use it subtly. Then there's high ISO noise reduction, which is, like it sounds, a noise reduction algorithm that applies to shooting high ISO. If you are planning on shooting at higher ISO values than would normally be recommended, on Fuji cameras, I generally notice about 1 to 2000 ISO or above, high ISO noise reduction can be helpful. However, if you know you're going to be able to shoot at relatively low ISO values, there is no real reason to apply high ISO noise reduction. And that is pretty much it. Those are all of the settings that are used to create your favorite film simulation recipes. Now that you know what each of those settings do and how they affect your image, you can go on and create your own recipes, emulate your own film stocks, and create your own unique looks, or at the very least, you can now fine-tune existing recipes to fit your personal style. If you are a Fuji shooter, I would love to hear in the comments down below what your favorite recipes are, because I'm always looking for new fun ones to experiment with on my Fuji cameras. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button. If you want to see more photography related content like this, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next one.